Hi everyone, Blake Crash Priddle here, and it is great to be back after a long break. This is The Medley, and this week we're going to be speaking with actor and voice actor Bruce Dinsmore. Bruce Dinsmore is based in Montreal, and he has a huge acting resume. He's perhaps best known for doing the voice of Mr. David Reed on the TV show Arthur, as well as Binky, Barnes, and Bailey. In this interview, you'll get to hear all about his career, as well as his perspective on a controversial episode of the TV show Arthur. I hope you enjoy. Your acting career has been extensive, to say the least. So tell us the story of how it all began.
It all began in a little community in Vancouver called Marpole, where I grew up. I went to high school at a high school called Sir Winston Churchill. Instead of the football team being the most kind of highest rung on the social ladder, the theater program was really esteemed, and it was run by an amazing woman named Frances Norman. And they did these musicals every year. So my brother played the saxophone, and one year he tried out for the musical. I think it was Guys and Dolls, and I went to see it. And it was amazing. It blew me away. It blew my socks off. I'm 3 years younger than my brother, so I would have been in, grade 6 or 7. And then he did another one the next year, and I went and saw that. So by the time I hit high school, I was so ready to jump in. And I had the really good fortune that by the time I got to grades 10, 11, 12, the man that was in charge of the theater program was a professional working theater artist. He had just bought a house on Salt Spring Island in off the coast of Vancouver, and he needed to pay for it. So he became a teacher full-time. And so his name was Bruce Riddell, and he was amazing. And he brought people in to work with us that were, professionals from the community. In my very last year of high school, we did Fiddler on the Roof, and I played the role of Tevye, and it was an inspiring experience from top to bottom, and I kind of knew that's what I wanted to do. And because of Bruce's involvement in the professional theater community, I kind of slid right in from high school into doing Shakespeare in the Park and small shows at the Vancouver East Cultural Center, and I just kind of, jumped into this life of theater. So that's how it all began.
In the 1990s, your career was boosted with the help of CNR. For those of you that don't know, CNR is a defunct production company that's made popular shows like Whimsy's House and Arthur, and I believe Little Lulu. How did you get involved with that production company?
The way everyone else did in Montreal, and I got to be honest with you, Blake, we all wish CNR was still around, because those honestly were the glory days. I mean, you mentioned a bunch of them. Arthur, of course, is the flagship. Caillou's in there. They did a live action remake of Lassie, Mumble Bumble. They had all kinds of things on the go. And I got in the way everyone else did by going in and auditioning and, being lucky enough to land a role. I can remember doing 2 or 3 original voice series at the same time. And that hasn't happened before or since. So, yeah, the mid-'90s Montreal CNR days were heady days indeed.
I heard that you discovered that you got the role of Arthur's Dad and Binky and Bailey while you were out golfing with a friend. I believe you were checking your messages or something, and then you got the message from your agent that said you got the part. That's completely true. It was back in the old days. There were no cell phones. So yeah, I went out and golfed, and it would have been about 4:30. You know what? I think it was a Friday. I mean, it was good news. It's always good news to hear that you've gotten a part. And I mean, I had no idea that Arthur would go on to have the longevity, the reach, the scope, and the scale that it has and does. So
Yeah, you never know. You just never know. Sometimes you luck out.
Because Arthur started off as a book series. Were you familiar with the book series prior to that?
I was not at all, and to be honest, the the books were quite different. The Mark Brown books were different even from the animation at the get go. The animation, of course, Greg Bailey's work evolved too over the decades. It seems surreal to say decades in regards to a project, but um, so no. And I had never met Mark, and in fact, I did not meet Mark until the very end of the series when we had a little get together in Montreal to celebrate the 25 years of Arthur. And I got to tell you, it was a really emotional moment for the both of us because we kind of looked at one another. I, of course, knew who he knew who I was, of course, too, because I'd been, voicing this person from his past. Mark was a teacher, of course, and he had a student that he told me. I don't think he told me this in confidence. Binky is based on a real life student that Mark Brown taught. So we had this really powerful moment of finally meeting after all these years. It was really something.
The voice that you used for Binky was also the voice that you used for Horace on Whimsy's House and for Tubby Tompkins. How did you develop that voice?
That voice, I can't even remember which came first, but I would say that Binky is. I think Binky was first, and then Tubby came after, and I would describe. So the Binky voice is this, right? It kind of lives there, but the Tubby voice is Binky with a cold. So I remember clearly in recording sessions, I'd get frantic waves from the other side of the glass saying, "Oh, keep them different." So if this is Binky, well, this is Tubby. Tubby had he had a more nasal thing, but the difference is minute, and but yeah, that was a little placement in my voice that I found one day that just became so familiar, and now of course I can put Binky on like an old pair of slippers, but back then it was kind of a challenge to work to keep the voices somewhat separate.
Well, Tubby Tompkins and Binky, they may have slightly different voices, but their personalities are somewhat similar. I mean, they do both like wrestling, and they're both misunderstood. They're not really bullies, but they like to pretend to be tough so that they can get people to like them.
I would totally agree, and I think it's funny. I haven't thought of Tubby in a long time. Oh my gosh, Tubby kind of came. I would say, if anything, Tubby had less redeeming qualities than Binky, in that he was a little more committed to chaos than maybe Binky was at the beginning. But Binky kind of had his rough edges, a little rounded by things like ballet and clarinet playing and an appreciation for the finer things. So if Tubby was Binky with a cold, Horace was 3 years younger than either of them, and even less, perhaps, quick, if I could be kind to Horace. Horace was young. That's what I recall about Horace, was that even though he had a kind of bigger voice, maybe than Binky or Tubby, he really embodied like the spirit of a kid, and so it could be innocent, could be I haven't seen that show in years, but my recollections of Horace tell me that he was a real pure innocent soul.
One of my favorite Binky moments was when he tried to tease Buster about having asthma, and he crawled over to him pretending to be out of breath, saying, "I can't breathe, tell the nurse, I think I have plasma."
Well, I think too there's a, was it an episode or was it a PSA we did about, oh gosh, it'll come to me, allergic reaction. When you have an allergic reaction,
Anaphylaxis.
Yeah, exactly. So I believe it's in an episode where Binky's all confused because he's going to meet anaphylaxis, thinking that anaphylaxis is a person, or antiphylaxis. I'm not sure, but yeah, Binky's grasp of things sometimes is delightful.
Yeah, my dad used to enjoy watching Arthur with me, and his favorite Binky moment was when he was teasing Arthur about having Mr. Ratburn stay at his house, so he threw a snowball at Arthur, and then he said, teacher's pet, something, something, something that rhymes with pet. When that happened, my dad would occasionally just sing the song for no reason, and we would laugh about it. It was awesome.
Oh, I like your dad.
Oh, he's a great guy.
That's funny.
There was another character that you voiced that was quite a bit different from other characters that you previously voiced, and that was Greens the Frog in Mumble Bumble. Was that a challenge to do that character's voice?
Yes. For the simple answer that Greens was just the highest pitch voice I had ever attempted and have ever done or been allowed to do. And yeah, he was just, I wouldn't even attempt it now. I might fall off my stool or hurt myself or pull a muscle. He was just in the stratosphere.
That cartoon, I believe, Mumble Bumble, originated in Denmark. Was it recorded in Danish first, and then you had to record the dub afterwards?
Not to my knowledge. I think from our end, it might have been based on a Danish story, or it might have been a co-production. But it was still from our end. We were the original voicers of it. I don't ever recall having to voice match, which sometimes you do, but not in that instance.
Is there an Arthur episode that's your favorite?
I would say that my favorite episodes were the least realistic. Whenever, I like the kind of kitchen sink, these are kids facing real kid problems, but my favorites were always when we time traveled, or when we got to play, different characters or ourselves in the past, or, Binky got to be several different historical figures throughout the run of the show. Those were always my faves when we were able to kind of leap. For me, that's the beauty of animation is leaping to those things that aren't possible, and then a little musical sting, and we're back, in Mr. Ratburn's classroom or what have you, and not a moment's passed type thing. Those were always my favorites to do.
My favorite was Arthur and DW's baby. There was one scene with you in it that's Arthur's dad opened the dishwasher and found his new shoes in there, and DW tried to blame it on Kate, saying that Kate did it, I saw her, and then you told her to go to her room and said, I'll be up to discuss it with you.
Yeah, it's funny, I think I've mentioned this before in these kind of situations, but I had my kids pretty late. So for the majority of Arthur, certainly in the 90s and the early 2000s, my son was born in 2003 and my daughter in 2009. So I wasn't a dad all that time. So yeah, and I used to I don't quite know how to approach it now. I would frequently have to be talked down by the director as dad, because my instinct my actor instinct at not being a dad would be to be even more forceful. And I remember all the time I was like, okay, no, Dad's trying to make his point, but he's not being sweet, but he's not being that. And it's funny, now that I am a dad, I don't know. I think I was kind of right to go hard at some of those lines. I think Arthur's parents exhibit a tremendous amount of patience. Let me put it that way.
There was a controversial episode of Arthur called Arthur's Big Hit. That's where the Arthur meme with his fist originated. And some fans have criticized that episode because they felt that it wasn't written properly. They felt that it gave kids the wrong message about hitting. Are you familiar with that controversy, and do you have an opinion on that particular episode?
I have to say I'm not. I am, of course, familiar with the episode, mostly because I watched it in preparation for this, but I wasn't aware that there was a controversy in the Arthur world about it. So that was news to me. Well, I'm curious to know what your opinion is, Blake. What do you think they got wrong, or what do you think is the?
Well, some people were upset that DW broke Arthur's plane, and instead of showing remorse for what she did, she got all smart alecky about it, saying that Arthur built it all wrong and that it's not her fault, and then she got hit. And some fans, felt that she deserved what happened. Just because somebody deserves to have something bad happen to them doesn't mean that it's right. But they felt that all the blame was being put on Arthur. He lost his TV privileges for a week, and DW got off scot-free, or so it seemed. And they felt that they both should have been punished, not just Arthur, because of what DW did. And the other issue was that Binky hit Arthur in the end, and Arthur's dad said, well, maybe that's how DW felt when you punched her. So that could give kids the wrong idea that if somebody hits somebody else, then it's okay to hit somebody else, when of course we all know that isn't the case. And I remember as a kid, I had to ask my dad for clarification about that, and he said, no, of course not. You don't hit somebody just because they deserve it, or just to make them understand how they felt when they hit another person, because violence should be for self-defense only. And I actually learned that in karate class. Dad and I took karate together, and we both learned that any kind of violence is for self-defense only.
No, that's super interesting to hear. And it's super interesting for me to hear that you had that reaction as a kid too, and that you remember it. I think you touched upon this in your description of the episode, clearly part of it is the fact that they had to set the bar really high, right? They had to, so if anything, maybe there's an unrealistic kind of tension created, for Arthur to become so enraged by such overtly callous and rude behavior from DW to maybe justify. Obviously nobody wanted to portray Arthur as a monster, so I guess that's part of it, is that maybe the stakes were overloaded in that sense. But clearly, the destruction of the plane, maybe that could have been dealt with more artfully. Maybe the point was too that sometimes life just ain't fair, and bad things happen. And to be fair, DW is significantly younger, and that's always a hard thing between siblings to understand. And siblings don't forget either. They don't forget when they were the age that their sibling now is. They don't forget the torture their parents put them through. Sometimes a parent will forbid one thing to a child when they're young, and then when their brother or sister comes along, it'll be like, oh, that's fine. Well, they know they still have the first kid. They didn't, he didn't fall off the side of the mountain tobogganing. So now the younger kid can toboggan down the crazy slope 2 years before the older kid, right? There's always these inequities, I guess, but it does seem a little a little unfair that they're held to a different standard. And then Binky in the boxing ring, yeah. No, I think you're right. I think there's an issue there. It's funny. When was that one written? Do you know offhand, Blake?
Yeah, it was written in 1999, I think. That's when it came out. And Binky actually felt remorse for hitting Arthur in the end and wanted to apologize, which just goes to show that, he has a heart, as big as a mountain, even though he can have that tough guy demeanor. What I found interesting about the episode was that a lot of Arthur's friends, condemned what he did. They were upset with him for doing it. And it's understandable, but from their perspective, when they look at DW, they just see a cute little sister, but they don't know what it's like to actually live with her. So I think that's why they may have jumped to conclusions a bit too easily. I can't stress it enough, in the episode, literally no one deserved to be hit. All in all, the series, despite some of the controversies, was still an awesome series, had great morals, great lessons, and I'm so glad that it was a part of my childhood and so many others.
Well, I got to tell you, from our end, it is, it continues to be humbling to, have been a small cog in the larger wheel that made the world of Arthur. Because even now, I see the place it has in people's lives and the kind of place in their hearts that it lives, and that's special and it's rare. So,
in the early 2000s, you appeared in a Grey Power insurance commercial with Gino Vanelli. What's the story behind that?
I'll tell you a funny story about it. Was because, as you say, it's audio. We're doing a podcast. My hair now is essentially white, and then it was gray, and the product being advertised was, I believe it's insurance, Grey Power, and they darkened my hair. My hair was too gray for the Grey Power spot. So the story behind it is every actor needs to work. So my agent sent me this audition. It looked like fun. I auditioned. They got back to us and said, "Wow, we think Bruce would be great. Would he like to do it?" And I'm not sure that I knew at the time that Gino Vanelli was involved. Anyway, it was fun. We shot that at Mel's Cité du Cinéma in Montreal, in a giant studio, a giant green screen studio, and it was a good time.
First time I saw that commercial, I was in my dorm room at college, and when I listened to your voice in the commercial, I thought to myself, that guy sounds just like Arthur's dad from Arthur. I wonder if that's the guy that did his voice. And I did a quick Google search, and sure enough, it more or less confirmed.
It's funny. I will sometimes be on a TV or a film shoot, and 2 or 3 days in, I'll have someone come up to me, like a coworker or a colleague or a co-star, and be like, "Did you do voice work?" I mean, the age of iPhones has kind of ruined that mystery. But yeah, no. Sometimes I'll work with people who aren't familiar with the voice work in my past, and they'll be like, "Your voice is really familiar," and they can't quite peg it. So.
You have been in some live-action roles. You've been in the Grey Power commercial, and you've also been in a film called 40 is the New 20, which I saw bits and pieces of on YouTube. Do you have a favorite live-action role, like of all time? Which one is your favorite?
I do, only because it was the very first feature I did. I did a film called The Myth of the Male Orgasm. It has very little to do with orgasms. It's a movie about a group of 3 friends. The main character, who I played, Jimmy Ravinsky, is about to turn 30, and he volunteers in an experiment at the university where he teaches, in to be a part of a female student's study into men and male perspectives. And so it's kind of an examination of of gender roles. It was shot here in Montreal. I made it with a bunch of incredible friends. Mark Camacho was in it. Felicia Schulman, all kinds of people I know. That the director Johnny Hamilton became a friend. So that would be my favorite, mostly because I'm proud of the movie, and I think the movie's. I showed my wife and I watched the movie with our kids. I think a couple of years ago, and for my kids, it's like watching an alien because my hair is dark brown. I'm 29 years old. It's like, who is this guy? They've never seen this guy, but I would have to say that's my favorite. That's my favorite film. You mentioned 40 is the New 20. That's Simon Boisvert. Simon wrote and directed a movie just this past spring in March, April that I did with David LaHaye and Stacey Mistison, who you might know from Degrassi, and myself, called Charlie Tango. And it's kind of a tense psychological thriller. So I don't know when that'll be out. That'll probably be out maybe Christmas, maybe fall of next year. So I haven't seen it yet. I haven't seen it put together artfully with all the bells and whistles. So maybe that'll become my new favorite. I don't know.
Yeah, Bruce, I had a really good time interviewing you this week, and it was a lot of fun. And from all of us here, we wish you all the best with your future endeavors.
Well, thank you, Blake, and right back at you. This has been an absolute pleasure.
And that was Canadian actor and voice actor Bruce Dinsmore. Don't forget, if you want to suggest guests for future shows, don't hesitate to contact me. Just visit my website, blakecrashpriddle.com. Until next time, remember, here at The Medley, we're all kinds of different.